For over half a century, humans have endeavored to make business a force for good. But is the movement working? Or is it time to explore a new path forward? Welcome to Less Talk, More Action. We are your hosts, Joel Caesar and Owen Barrett, experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. In each episode, we ask provocative questions and share stories from the front lines of sustainability with leaders in science, tech, and business taking real action to design a cleaner, better future. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to Less Talk, More Action podcast. My name is Joel Caesar, the world's undisputed voice of building decarbonization. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of Green Building. Today's guest was Andrew Jones, a scientist, chemical engineer, and entrepreneur who is pioneering breakthrough climate solutions as the founder of Carba, a company focused on gigaton scale carbon removal. So, interesting way we found Andrew while we were poking fun at his entire industry and career. But like the great shepherds we are of truth, we brought him on the show to hear his side, and he didn't disappoint. What'd you think?
I think I'm a believer at this point. I think, like everything, details matter. I don't think all carbon removal is created equal. But, I mean, what Andrew was talking about, his business model, it seems legit. I'm a believer.
And he's just, true scientist, so smart, so legit, so articulate, thinking about facts and not like spinning anything. So, as much as you and I can take shots at the big tech companies and how they're maybe, we think, still over prioritizing carbon removal, you hear a guy like that talk and where he comes from and why he got into this and what he's trying to do, and it all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, this will be cool, but before we dive into the conversation with Andrew, let's jump into a bit we're going to call, it's going to be the second version of Joel the Climate Skeptic, or Climate Denier, you might even call me. So I'm going to talk about a post where somebody in the climate movement was alarmingly citing a recent DOE report, so the current administration's DOE, and the documentation they prepared as to the justification to why the EPA should not regulate carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. So huge kind of the circumstances of the EPA deciding not to regulate climate, like what it does to the entire industry and our ability to fight climate change, that it can't be understated. This is an enormous deal. And so, they had to post like what their arguments were. And she highlights a couple of them, saying they think climate models may be overstating future warming. They think long-term U.S. data doesn't show clear increases in hurricanes, floods, and droughts. I can't believe that's true. This one, though, is what I want to talk about. CO2 has both costs and some benefits, like crop growth. And then it says the last one is U.S. mitigation efforts would have little direct global impact, which I also think is a cop-out. This idea for years. Well, if China and India don't do it, why are we doing it? Like, well, because we're America and we should lead. But so I won't dispute some of these. I think we can all agree. Like, we are not going to agree with the current DOE's perspective. But I did want to one of them that caught my attention is the benefits of more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to crop growth. So the one thing no scientist, no matter how brilliant they are, even like a guy like Andrew who's on this episode, climate scientists, no one knows exactly what's going to happen with the warming that we're creating and the climate change that humans are inducing. Like, we can all say it's a risk. We probably shouldn't be playing this game, but we don't really know what's going to happen. We can look at ice cores and study soils from ancient times to try to guess, okay, if carbon dioxide was this high then, here's what else was happening, and it was pretty warm, and that's going to change the way our current climate works, and that's a big risk. Okay, all that to be said. But why don't we ask this question more of, could this actually benefit crop growth? What do you think?
I think we don't ask the question because the sustainability community, doesn't want to give any, credence or justification to increasing emissions. I agree. There may be benefits. I've heard Siberians are super happy because weather's getting a lot more mild. Ice sheets are receding. They're getting more land. I mean, new shipping pathways are opening up in the Arctic. Sure, there's going to be benefits to climate change. But if the planet, if like the oceanic currents turn off and the Gulf Stream stops and we have these catastrophic wildfires every day, like, or every year, is that worth better crop yields? Like, I would say no, but I just don't think anybody wants to give, like, we as an industry don't want to give any credit to any possible positive outcomes from higher CO2 concentrations.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can realistically say there won't be any.
I took my kids recently to the Natural History Museum in New York City, and they had this whole wing in the museum dedicated to climate science. It's really cool, really well done, really dynamic, interactive features and different exhibits. And my little girls, even though it's very much over their head, were like playing around with the stuff and like asking me questions. So it was like, in a lot of ways, a very positive thing that this museum is doing. But there was a huge ice core. Like there, they showed this giant ice core, and there's a whole like exhibit dedicated to how we take these ice cores and how we learn from them, and the different stratifications and how we can understand the gas composition in ancient times. And I was looking at this thing thinking, I've dedicated my entire professional career to like fight this climate change crisis that we say it is, and look, so much of that like idea is embedded in that ice core. I was like looking at this ice core, I'm like, look at this thing, it's a fucking ice core, like. How can we be so sure? And I saw, again, I'm sounding like a skeptic and a denier. Like, oh, can we really learn from these ice cores? But it did, like, after, like, reading this, the crop growth thing, I'm like, that ice core can't tell you what it was like back in whenever ancient times when carbon dioxide was as high as it is now in the atmosphere. There wasn't 8 billion humans trying to grow food back then. So, that's the piece of this we can't be so sure of.
We got to get our farmer on the pod. I mean, I wonder do they pump CO2 into greenhouses to increase crop yields? Like, if it's so beneficial, is that a approach taken within ag?
Yeah. Or are we seeing crop yields increase? Is there some data? Like maybe the DOE report probably cherry picks some data point, but like they must be citing something.
Yeah, I don't know. We should get a climate denier on the podcast.
We should get. I would like to get a climate denier and like a real climate scientist. I've reached out to a few, like the legit. So look, if we're talking like this, they're gonna be like, "You guys are fucking nuts. Like, get back to work reducing emissions. Stop questioning us."
Oh man, love it. You gotta ask questions. You can't stop asking questions or being curious.
Yeah, and we'll wrap on this because it's a great segue to Andrew and how he talks about as a scientist, his whole life is questioning everything. Like that's what scientists do. So we can't ever just sit here and be like, "Yep, everything's sorted. We're good. We have to just stay the status quo because this is what scientists decided 30 years ago." It's like, well, new data presents itself, and we should always be looking into it the same way we look into the science that shows like our current perspectives are true.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Another segment of Joel, the climate denier. But now let's jump into a conversation with Andrew Jones. Joining us today is Andrew Jones, a scientist, chemical engineer, and entrepreneur who is pioneering breakthrough climate solutions. Andrew is the founder of Carba, a company focused on gigaton scale carbon removal, and the founder of ARC, where he's developing catalytic reactor technology to transform industries. With a career at the intersection of science, innovation, and entrepreneurship, Andrew has built a reputation as both an inventor and a visionary, dedicated to tackling climate change with scalable, science-driven solutions. So, Andrew, welcome to Less Talk, More Action.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, Andrew, we get right to work here on the show. We start our guests off with the same question. How are you taking action to make the world a better place?
Yeah, it's a great question to start, and I'm going to give you a simple answer, but there's complexity embedded in that. And so essentially, what we're trying to do here at Carba is build the most scalable approach to removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bring along with that co-benefits that improve our environment. And the complexity there really lies in that scalability question. How do you make something scalable? And that touches on a lot of pieces of the business model.
Andrew, carbon removal seems to be a delicate topic within sort of sustainability and decarbonization. How do you see it? I'm assuming you see it as complementary with what I'll call actual decarbonization strategies. But what's your perspective?
Yeah, I would agree with that perspective. Decarbonization, which is essentially reducing our fossil fuel use, is priority number one. We need to reduce fossil fuels, but in every single climate scenario, there is no way that we sort of mitigate the worst effects of climate and prevent sort of the 2 degrees C of warming without carbon dioxide removal. And that's specifically removing sort of legacy emissions. We're at 420 part per million. There is no way to bring that down to 350 ppm or even pre-industrial levels without removing those legacy emissions. And that's deemed critical by the scientists working on these climate models, or we will exceed sort of the worst case scenarios in climate.
Well, Andrew, Owen asked that in a nice way. I'm going to be totally transparent. We found you because I don't know if you knew this, we were kind of making a joke about carbon removal technologies. And so we do a bit. We interview a person like yourself, expert, entrepreneur, people taking action, which you're all of. But like Owen and I will do a bit before the show. We just try to joke around or do things that are, unique, we think, or different in the podcast climate conversation. So we did one where I went into ChatGPT and I said, create 3 fake carbon removal companies and give me one real one. And they gave us you as the real one, because I think you guys recently signed a deal with Microsoft, so it was like the news piece. And then there was 3 other ones. One of them, and I don't know if you remember, one of them was like a submarine that takes seaweed to the bottom of the ocean, AI.
It was like a cow burping.
A cow wearing a helmet. So it's like these preposterous like carbon removal ideas. Now, I'm going to tell you why we did it that way, Andrew. So, full transparency. Again, Owen and I work in the world of like decarb. We're trying to, I work on a AI product now that focuses on providing energy efficiency insights to commercial real estate. Owen's been doing solar and multifamily for a long time. We both have been in this green building, energy efficiency, renewable energy world for a long time. And I was running the net zero program for a large tech company. And I was in charge of decarbonizing the buildings that we owned or operated. But I was part of this group that was like thinking about net zero at this whole company. And you would know them, people that watch the show know where I worked. But I got to be part of this really cool, like kind of committee of across the company, everyone working on net zero and the different business units to come together and try to prioritize and figure out how we were going to like mobilize the right resources to go to the right activities at the right moment, at the right scale. And there was a whole conversation about carbon removal. And we had these presentations, people would come in. And I remember there was one on seaweed sinking. And I love the ocean, and Owen does too. We met in Santa Barbara, and we're surfers together. And I know there's lots of co-benefits to the seaweed sinking idea or restoring kelp forests. And, the seaweed has to sink. You could probably explain this better than we can, that the seaweed has to sink or else the carbon dioxide is not really sequestered, at a level. It'll show up on the beach and off gas if you don't sink it. And so I remember thinking to myself, man, that is cool. I know what you just said. Like we can't get to the parts per million of carbon dioxide that's going to prevent the catastrophic effects of climate change unless we pull some of it out. But like, I remember thinking, well, man, that seems so far-fetched. Why don't we just decarbonize the buildings? So that's a long way to like, I think, ask Owen's question a different way. Just like, how did you get to Carba? Why this? And like, what's motivating you? And how do you respond to maybe like haters like us who are like, I think we should focus less on carbon removal?
Yeah, it's a great question again. And I love the divisiveness of, is carbon removal bullshit? Do we have to do it?
I don't think we're not saying it's bullshit. I know it's real. I'm just like, it's a prioritization thing, I think.
And I think, so I think what will help is I can talk about my motivations and how I got here. And then I think also talking about sort of the macro view. And so I already said, basically if we decarbonize today 100% and we had zero, fossil emissions, we would still need then carbon removal to sort of get to those scenarios where we don't have mass harm with climate change. What motivated me, I have looked at my life and said, how do I make the biggest impact with the skills that I have and the connections that I have? And when I looked at decarbonization, I saw that we've made huge leaps and bounds in sort of cheap renewable energy. Solar is at an all-time low. I don't think there's a lot I can do to sort of improve that tech. Now it's a regulatory and money problem. You know, we need to improve the grid. We need to get more batteries. We need to get more solar. That's all solvable, but it's not something where I can really make an impact. What I was frustrated by was that the other piece of the equation, which is this sort of 10 to 20 billion tons of carbon removal that we have to do per year per the IPCC and National Academies of Sciences, there didn't seem like there were scalable solutions that really made sense, right? You talked about seaweed in the bottom of the ocean, and people have tried to do iron fertilization of the ocean for decades. I didn't see a lot of technologies that made sense, and so that was a place where I put my headspace and said, I think this is an area where I can actually make an impact and something that's desperately needed, and we need to be moving faster on this. So I completely agree with you guys that you know, the bulk of the mind share of all of us should be on decarbonizing, and because every piece of fossil you take offline and put renewable, there's this you know, continued gains where every year, you know, you install a solar plant, every year you're not using that fossil energy. But at the end of the day, no matter how much of that we do, there's still going to be a carbon removal piece, and someone needs to be working on those problems. And those are, to me, the hardest problems to work on, and that's what I get attracted to, is how do I do that? And with my science background, I've always been sort of thinking about how do I use science and technology to solve the biggest problems of our time.
Can you treat Joel like an idiot and explain your technology as though he is one?
Why just me? Why can't you be the idiot too?
Yeah. So essentially what we're doing is we're letting nature do the hard work. So to remove CO2 from the air, you have to pull it out of, you know, air is a mixed medium that has 0.04% CO2. To purify and pull CO2 out of the air, there is a huge energy problem there. There's an entropic and enthalpic energy penalty. And so we let plants and trees do that hard work. They use solar energy, they pull the CO2 into the structure of plants, and it actually gets embedded into the cellulose and lignin of the plant as they grow. The problem is, as those plants die, which they inevitably do, they die, they either sit there and decompose and get re-released, that all that carbon gets re-released back into the atmosphere as CO2 and methane, or they're taken and burned. They burn in a forest fire, they're piled up and burned, or they're burned for energy, and in that process, you're re-releasing all that carbon back into the atmosphere as well. And so in both of those processes, you kind of create this fast carbon cycle, which if everything's balanced, you're emitting as much as you're removing, and everything's good. But since we're so far off balance, we've dug up trillions of tons of old trees and algae, that we need to actually take that plant waste and store that carbon and put it back underground where we found it originally. And so our process takes plant waste, which in our specific use case here, we're using tree trimmings from, you know, utility line clearing operations or forestry /waste. We may use, you know, agricultural waste streams in the future, although you have to be careful with how you use those. And we take those plant waste streams, and before they can decompose through composting or fire, we will heat them and remove the food value of those plant species using a process called pyrolysis. And then we take that charcoal, which looks something like this, it's a biochar, and we put that into areas where we can store it safely. And so one such area is as a daily cover in landfills. We mix in with their daily cover, and it creates this stratified layer in a landfill that actually acts like a filter for an environmental co-benefit. So this black material is kind of like an activated carbon filter, kind of like a Brita filter. And as water percolates through the landfill, we can suck up some of the toxins that would otherwise go out into wastewater streams. And we can reduce potentially some of the methane emissions in landfills. And all the while, we can lock up the carbon in that landfill in a very sort of secure, highly regulated space, which is a landfill. And so that's our beachhead. Because we see an immense possibility to scale, this gets back to scalability. It's very affordable. It's already happening. They're already doing this with soils. We just mix in, and it provides all of these environmental co-benefits. So sorry if that was too
No, that
many
was-
steps,
No, I
but
like it. Yeah.
I could
Joel,
see why
I just-
you're a scientist. That was well said. Yeah, I was
I
following
got
along
just a
perfectly.
quick question. So you're effectively, by burying your biochar, that's when you're trapping the emissions, or is it the heating process that's trapping, I guess, the could be emissions?
Yep. Yeah. So it's if we just buried the wood, much of it would decompose in a landfill into methane and CO2. And so by heating it with this pyrolysis process, we're preventing that ability to decompose. And
Permanently.
So
Is it a permanent
permanently.
solution? Yeah. Oh,
Is there
cool.
emissions from the pyrolysis? What happens?
There are some emissions. Yep. So when you pyrolyze, when you heat wood, and you've all done this, if you've created a fire, you've heated wood, and then at the end of that fire, you see some charcoal that's left over when you quench it too early, when you stop the fire. We do that in a controlled fashion, so we obviously minimize the emissions. But anytime you heat wood, you give off some vapors, like wood alcohols. Methanol is actually methyl alcohol, which is wood alcohol. But other vapors that we colloquially call pyrolysis vapors, they come off. We burn those for heat, and that allows us to sort of self-sustain this reaction. So we're not putting excess heat into this reaction, but there is some carbon loss from that vapor that comes off. And we take that all into account, and then net, we're burying. It ends up being about 0.85 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per ton of biomass wet, depending on some of the characteristics, that gets buried underground.
I more than most people, I spent a lot of time around landfills. My dad was in the waste industry growing up in Pennsylvania, so I know the daily cover thing pretty well. Are you giving this to the landfill like for free? Do they pay you for it?
Yeah, so that kind of gets into
I would
business.
imagine the economic drivers here are the carbon credits you're selling to Microsoft. We'll get to that, but like, is there this other revenue stream where the landfill itself is also paying you?
Yeah, that gets into business model, which I can't get into too many specifics, but the main economic drivers here are the carbon credits. So these projects would not happen without the carbon credit revenue. And so we are thinking that long-term there's going to be a lot of environmental co-benefits that we still have to build out the science for in these landfills. And some of these we know, such as the filtration capacity to pull out things like forever chemicals that are in landfills and are potential liabilities for these landfills. But some of them we don't, and that's things we're studying.
This may be a proprietary business model question too. So if you can't answer it, no worries. But it seems like with a heavy tech like this, there's a lot of upfront cost, and you have this massive chicken or the egg dilemma. Do you find that corporations who are interested in carbon offsets before you have the sort of justification to move forward on R&D, how does that timing work?
Yeah, you're probably gonna have the offtake agreements before you get the R&D investment. If I had to answer for him, but let him answer.
That is the ultimate struggle of entrepreneurship and startups, and especially in climate. And today with venture in such a tough spot as well, it makes it incredibly difficult. So you're right, there is sort of a chicken and the egg in many places. One is, how did we get this model started before we had too much money? And it's sort of been piecemeal. We've built it up. Finally, we were able to get this large contract with Microsoft, which is public, and that helps obviously motivate more investment. And then there is a large CapEx piece for our reactors, and so that gets into project finance, and how do you project finance the first of a kind and then the N+1 of a kind. And so there's a lot of avenues we're looking at. We've been successful in a number of different ways and unsuccessful in other ways. And you're right, it's a chicken and the egg problem. We strongly believe that once we're producing at the end of this year, we're going to have a lot of different avenues open up for project finance.
Cool.
We talked about seaweed sinking and how I don't know what the way I don't want to say crazy, but it seems like just like an out there idea. Again, as cool as it is, biochar seems a little more straightforward. Like I guess I'm going to ask you about some of these other ones and whether or not you said like, hey, I'm a scientist, I have skills and networks, and I want to put that towards big problems. Totally like value that perspective. Did you like go rate if you're like, okay, I want to do carbon removal because I think that's the big problem. Like you said earlier, it's not scaling, and then go, okay, if I'm going to do that, then it's biochar or it's direct air capture or it's. I have a couple notes here. Owen and I just took a shot on LinkedIn at one of the big tech companies making an announcement about ocean alkalinity enhancement. I know there's enhanced rock weathering. So like there's a lot of ways to go about this, and some of them are getting funded by the big tech companies. I guess why biochar? How'd you land on this one?
Yeah, it's a great story. So I think I can maybe tell you a little bit more of my story and kind of how I wound up here if we have the time to do that. Is that
Please, we love on this show as much about the entrepreneurial journey as we do about the tech or the climate stuff itself. So please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start actually back when I was 12 years old, and I was actually playing with gasoline. And my mother
like the start to a great story.
So I think you should title this "From Pyro to Pyrolysis."
We always love when the guest offers the title. So thank you.
So I was a 12-year-old pyro, like any good scientist or chemist, I should say. And my mother caught me. I was burning gasoline on my driveway, and I was really fascinated by the way this stuff burned and how much energy was given off by this stuff. And I don't think I was sophisticated enough to say there's 40 megajoules per kilogram in this gasoline, but I knew there's a lot of energy, and I knew that we were converting chemical energy into heat. And that ended up winding me into a trip to the fire chief's office where my mother took me, and I had to watch a video of a house burning down and why I shouldn't play with gasoline. But that sort of started the motivation of my journey into chemistry and science and understanding sort of how is energy transformed between these different modes and how do we harness chemistry in the right way. And so I ended up going to the University of Minnesota studying chemical engineering and worked for one of the pioneers in pyrolysis, where he was actually basically doing the same thing, taking wood chips and plants and putting them on a hot 900 degrees C rhodium catalyst and vaporizing it into hydrogen, jet fuel, plastics, like olefins, which are building blocks of plastics. And I thought that was alchemy, fascinating. And so I jumped headfirst into that and kind of learned as much as I could. And that's why I went into chemical engineering, why I went into catalysis. And I always had this sort of sustainability tent of how do I make a huge impact, but then also fossil fuels are finite, no matter how you look at it. We need circular, sustainable ways to produce everything around us, from plastics to hydrogen to jet fuel. And this was this great approach of using biomass to do that. And of course, fossil fuels all came from biomass 300 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. All the trees and algae turned into coal and oil, respectively. And so it just sort of made a lot of sense.
Why do they always say it's dinosaurs?
Yeah, because they're wrong. But so what I love to say is what's crazy to me is 300 million years ago, there was this 60 million year period called the Carboniferous period. And that was where almost all of our carbon fossil fuels were created. And what it was these large ferns that kind of looked like trees, and they fell down, and there's disagreement in the scientific community, but some people think that the fungus hadn't evolved to break down the lignin in those ferns, and so they just got buried. Others think there were more subduction events and things got buried faster. But either way you look at it, they got in these peat bogs, and you formed pretty much all the coal we know today. And so we're digging up this 300 million year old coal, which was ferns, like these fern trees. I don't know what they were exactly called, what genus, but and then on the oil side, you had all this algae that sunk for some reason, and so you had algal blooms, and they sunk and created all the oil. And you can see that in the molecules. As I've studied the molecules of oil and coal, you can see the remnants of what was the tree structure and what was the triglycerides or the fatty structure from the algae. We need to replicate that. Since we've dug all that up and burned 1 trillion tons of it, we now need to suck out 1 trillion tons and put it somewhere. And
is that really the number? 1 trillion tons?
Mm-hmm. And so
That's
a trillion is unfathomable, right? Yeah, 10 to the 12th tons, not even pounds, that's tons. And if you were to liquefy 1 trillion tons of CO2, that's the volume of Lake Erie in just volume. So the problem at hand is not just like, what is the technology you use and what kind of like wingdings can you invent? It is, how do you move 1 trillion tons of something from an atmosphere and into some, sequester it into some hidden spot, right? Either underground or in space or wherever you do. So it's a huge material handling problem, which is why I've been attracted to waste management, because they're already moving megatons of material and you can plug into that system. And so I know this is like a long-winded answer to this, but I ended up going from pyrolysis to UC Berkeley, where I studied sustainable fuels and catalysis, and then started a company that built detectors for measuring pyrolysis gases. And then 4.5 years ago, I said, how do I make a bigger impact? And this is where I looked at the entire white space of carbon removal. And I looked at everything you've mentioned. I looked at enhanced rock weathering. I looked at ocean alkalinity or ocean, seaweed. And initially I was attracted to this idea, which Greenpeace had tried, which was, let's seed the ocean with iron and make a ton of algae and it'll just sink. But the problem with the ocean is it's such a complex system and there's so many negative unintended consequences with anything you do with the ocean. So you have to be incredibly careful.
That's
and
why
then the other issue,
even this alkalinity one, I haven't read as much about it, but I'm already like, that seems like a pretty big science experiment with the ocean. Sorry, keep going.
yeah, no, I mean, and I don't want to like bad talk any technology, but what my thinking was, okay, as I looked at all these things, I looked at them based on ability to scale, cost, regulatory hurdles, negative unintended consequences or sort of risk of that, and then also the potential co-benefits. And I quickly kind of saw with direct capture, it's crazy expensive. There's a ton of regulatory hurdles. There were no co-benefits that I could see. And so I just didn't see how that could really make big impacts in the near term. Similar with ocean, it's not an expertise of mine, so I did not feel comfortable there. And I was very concerned with sort of how do you do things without negative consequences? And then how do you do appropriate MRV, which is sort of the measurement and verification of those things. And that, as I talk to people about enhanced rock weathering, that ends up being part of the issue there, is you can put alkaline materials into soils, crush up rocks, and there's alkoxides and other materials that will absorb CO2, but those end up getting kind of washed away with water, and then trying to verify that those did indeed, they end up getting washed into rivers and then eventually oceans. And trying to verify, the changes or measure the changes is very difficult.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means you just need to be careful and develop systems for that. What really attracted me to biochar in particular, and why I think it's one of the best solutions for carbon removal, is that there is somewhere between 10 and 120 billion tons of biomass waste produced everywhere around the world every year. And that alone is, and it's a big range because we don't really quantify that well, but that is enough to solve this problem, the carbon removal problem.
When you say bio-waste, are you including food waste?
Yeah, yes.
That
number, yep, that number will include
human waste too, like human solid waste.
Yeah, that doesn't, which I would call like biosolids. That number doesn't include biosolids, and there are some cool companies working on like what do we do with that stuff.
I got a building I worked on in Santa Monica that uses composting toilets and creates a usable material out of the biomass. We talked about cooking it. Actually, I mean, there's the joke they were gonna buy what we joked called a shit cooker, and we were gonna put that in the basement to like once it had reached this level of compost, which we think was Class A, maybe Class B compost, to give the health department additional security, comfort, you might say, then we'd cook it further. So I don't know. Let's not go there for now, but yeah, that's why I have to.
Andrew, I've always heard, just real quick, I've always heard that if food waste were a country, it would be it would have the highest emissions of any country. Is that true?
Someone told us that. Some earlier guest told us.
Was that,
Yeah.
is that, I mean, it's like a crazy statistic. That and 1 trillion tons is like blowing my mind right now. I can't think about anything else.
It is well, I think the number is around 500 million tons a year of food waste in the US. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's on that order.
Can you
And
take the
US
same, oh, sorry, finish, and then I got another question.
Yeah, the US is, obviously we waste an enormous amount of food. It's a disgusting amount of food. And yes,
Can you take your pyrolysis model and apply it to food waste just as you can like green waste or whatever the terminology is?
yeah, so scientifically there's no issue with that. You can, the same organic structures in plants are obviously in food. Food are mostly plants. And so you can do the same pyrolysis process. There's a few challenges to that, the water content, and just sort of extracting it from landfills and doing that thing, because right now most of that food waste winds up right into your landfill waste streams. But it's certainly a future avenue we're super excited about, because that's a big waste stream. And I wanted to say something about the human waste side. I thought about human waste. I don't ever want to work with human waste. Because I had a friend who was doing that and trying to make biofuels from human waste, and every day he'd come home just smelling like human waste.
Yeah, I got too much into it trying to build this building, but I was like a 12-year-old making poop jokes the whole time. So we're all just 12-year-olds trying to solve the climate crisis, I guess.
We are. We don't ever grow up, really.
Well, so like when you're now saying, I guess we didn't let you finish that answer, but you're like, there's just, if you just look at the amount of raw material that you need for your process, that can solve climate change. You can pull enough carbon dioxide out of it if you used all that I don't know, what do you again call it, raw material. But I spent some time at a big tech company, really wonky into net zero and all the definitions of the science-based targets and carbon disclosure project and greenhouse gas protocols, like what's scope 1, what's scope 2, what's scope 3, what counts as removal, how do you do all this stuff. And so my question here is going to be about additionality. So like, how does Microsoft proving like we bought from Carba, and that means like that wood that they're using to put in the landfills would have otherwise been burnt. I guess that's what has to be proven, right? Like the additionality has to be proven. So is that a challenge? Is that on you or is that on Microsoft?
That's on us.
To prove the additionality.
To prove that, yep. And so that gets to sort of this biomass sourcing question. So I said there's enough biomass out there. What I didn't say is how do you source it and how do you do that responsibly? And that's a key part to that equation and key to sort of our business model. Because what we realized is that tons of companies have tried in the past to do big biofuels projects using biomass. And I think what they always did wrong is they tried to do this huge scale. So they're trying to do 1 million tons a year or 2 million tons a year of biomass. And that means that you're trucking in biomass, because just in a 10-mile radius, you're not going to get that much biomass, or it's not going to be aggregated already. And when you start trucking in, you start paying for homogeneous feedstocks, you start to incentivize bad actors to sort of cut down forests and do other things that are unsustainable.
It's kind of like some of the companies that make stuff out of ocean plastic, and it's like if you get big enough as a company on ocean plastic, like you're gonna be incentivized to want more ocean plastic. So
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's like this scale question, and that's where like oil and gas, they operate at scale. They don't want to do these small decentralized plants. But I think for any biomass project to work, it needs to be smaller and decentralized. And by small, I mean sort of on the order of 100,000 tons or smaller, because that's what we see being aggregated. And so in our model, for example, we have utility companies that are trimming trees. We have residential and commercial tree trimming operations. They are aggregating it. In every city in the US, there are aggregation points, compost facilities, or even in Minneapolis, we have a facility that burns 300,000 tons of wood for energy. That's sort of the scale that you can realistically do it before you're trucking in material. And then secondly, you need to be able to take scraps, like the stuff that has leaves and twigs and other things like that, so that you're not, again, incenting people to cut down, a tree farm for the specific
The feedstock.
that you
Yeah,
need.
yeah.
And that's why I, myself and my co-founder, Paul Downhauer, who's spent his life at the University of Minnesota as a professor, thinking about how do we use biomass in the most responsible way. And that's what concerns me about BECCS as well, is BECCS projects are generally big. They generally need a lot of biomass to make.
Wait, for the audience and maybe even Owen, can you define BECCS real quick?
So BECCS is burning.
Well, do you know what BECCS means? It's an
No,
acronym.
I don't. No.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, there's so many acronyms and terms like counterfactual and other things. BECCS is burning biomass for energy, but then capturing the stack emissions, capturing the CO2 that comes off. And so, like, we have a facility here in Minnesota that burns biomass for energy. You only get about $30 a ton in energy for that biomass. So that's one problem, is economics. But then the second thing is, you usually have to build these things at scale, especially with carbon capture, to make them make sense. And so that's going to necessitate like trucking of biomass in. And for the reasons I mentioned, that worries me, and you need to do a lot of diligence. What we've instead targeted is, let's only operate at this sort of 20 to 100,000 tons of biomass per year at these sites. And let's decentralize our operations, because biomass is decentralized. And then we can be at every municipal landfill. We could be at every.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you parking yourself right next to the landfill?
Yep.
Having little like mini pyrolysis chambers at the source of where this biomass is coming.
Yep.
Yeah.
And by many, it's still scale, right? We're doing
Yeah.
40,000 tons at a site. That's still a decent, 20 foot.
I'm realizing how much time we're at. This has been so fascinating. We're just like down rabbit holes, and there's so much more. I'm looking at your list of questions you wanted to get to, all questions I'd love to ask you. So I apologize. Owen and I here are just like taking you down rabbit holes. But since we don't have much time left, Andrew, what would you like to, let me ask one question, and then I'm gonna let you like tell us what you want to tell us. But like, let's the elephant in the room here. Like, you got big tech companies with big net zero commitments as off takers. Is there a concern? What if their net zero commitments waver? What if carbon removal comes out of vogue? Is that that's got to be the biggest risk to your future?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's not a lot of tech risk here. There's not a lot of development risk. It's really the
motivation
risk
of society to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Yeah, it goes back to, CO2 should have a price. We should have a price on carbon dioxide. I don't see that ever happening in the U.S. It is a waste product. We just don't monetize it because we don't see it. So I bring my garbage out every day or every week. I don't bring my CO2 out because I just pump that into the atmosphere. So it's amazing that tech companies have taken this stance and have the ability to sort of pay for their emissions. And I fully expect that's going to continue. But you're right. Our business model is reliant on people paying for carbon removal.
Oh, and anything else on your end? I don't know if you're looking at his questions. There's a bunch here that I would love to have him address.
No, I just, I didn't mention this because it's not nearly as sophisticated as your solution, but in grad school, my thesis was similar to your solution, but we were doing on-site composting, vermicomposting. And I'm like thinking through, so we were going right after food waste. And I'm thinking through everything that you've said about your approach, and obviously it's way more sophisticated, but the thing that we always found fascinating is how expensive waste is and how much more expensive it's getting. And so if you can have an alternative to sending food waste to the landfill in sort of an environment where net zero commitments are getting a little bit more shaky, I guess, or just the importance of them is kind of taking a back seat. I still think there's a path forward with their business model, even if it's not based on carbon credits.
You're right. I'm simplifying it a bit. Like our umbrella is, we find waste streams and we figure out how to valorize them.
Yeah.
Now, the best way to valorize that today is carbon credits. There are other ways to take waste, make a biocarbon, and then use that biocarbon in different industries. So one example is for steel production, you can offset coal. In that case, you're still burning it. There's many other options that we are we are working on, and we do have avenues for success with that. None of them are as big or as impactful to the earth and to the environment as carbon removal.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm gonna ask you one question from your list. I was just reading them, trying to think. Oh, I want to ask you 5 of these, but and then we gotta get to our last question. But I think the one that's most intriguing to me is, and you've already kind of answered some of this, but if you could bust one myth about carbon removal or biomass, what would it be?
Ooh,
I'm sorry if I'm stumping you. I thought you gave us this question.
well, I didn't read the question, so to be fair, I think the biggest myth about and the biggest concerns we hear are biomass sourcing. It's that we are causing people to cut down trees or causing people to unsustainably harvest stuff, and that's the myth. The reality is we are only taking waste streams that have negative or zero value. There's no incentive for people to cut this stuff down. We are taking stuff that, frankly, our city is freaking out about because there's too much and they don't know what to do. And even in Minneapolis Twin Cities, there's a huge emerald ash borer problem, and it's killed a lot of ash trees. They are quarantined, and there's a huge amount of excess waste that the solution today is burn it or try to compost it very fast, which when you're doing that composting, you are releasing CO2 and methane.
Yeah.
Real quick, Andrew, have you looked into the beetle in California and Colorado that's killing all the pine trees? Is it similar? Are the states sort of handling it similarly, just burning it?
I'm freaking out about what to do with all of it. Yeah.
Completely right. Yeah, bark beetle is decimating trees. There is so much wood waste, so much waste streams that are just stranded somewhere, big piles that they wait for winter, they burn them, or they just burn them, or they let them decompose. And in all those scenarios, in a matter of a year or less, they're going to release all that CO2.
Well, Andrew, fascinating stuff, man. This has been cool. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing what you're doing. We'll have to, we had a different, Owen and I can be opinionated and we can take shots at some things that we don't think are right. But we want to do with the podcast, like, let's bring them on. Let's bring on Carba. Like, let's learn from them. And then we did this recently with this guy, this other like green building certification protocol that we don't like. And this guy came on and kind of set us straight. Oh, and I don't know about you, but I'm like almost like kind of a fan of his now.
2 for 2. Yeah, 2 for 2. I got
the
a
same here.
opinion.
I'm like, fuck, fucking Carba. This is great.
I love to hear that, and I love the playing devil's advocate.
It's got to be real talk, and let's hit the shit head on. We know there's challenges, we know there's risks, and we know there's trade-offs. That's the nature of sustainability. Anyone been doing this long enough knows this is all one big trade-off we're trying to do. So, Andrew, again, thank you. All that to be said. So, one last question to wrap it up here. There's lots of negativity around climate and sustainability, and negative news, pessimistic news cycles. So, we like to finish on optimism. What gives you hope for the future?
I'd say I've never been more emboldened, actually. Politics aside, companies and people care. And they are, you look at the last 6 months, there's been more purchases of carbon removal than the last 5 years and combined. And so we're seeing a lot of action. We're seeing projects start to take root. We feel very bullish about what we're doing, and we think we can make a real impact. We know we can make a real impact in this world, and so it's really exciting. The whole team is very excited, and we've got a great team behind us. It is a message of hope that I always tell everyone, we have the technology to do this. Science and technology can solve these problems. We need the people working at it. We need the money behind it, and those things are in place now, and so it's happening.
Cool stuff. Owen, any last thoughts?
No, appreciate you coming on. Definitely changed my mind about certain things. So I'm sure some of these topics are just, you read different perspectives one way or another, and it's hard for someone like me that doesn't understand the science necessarily. I have never been exposed to the technology. So you just read both sides and it's hard to come to a conclusion. But then when you talk to someone like you, it seems pretty clear that it is helpful, that it is important, that it has to be part of the sort of the largest solution. So appreciate you coming on.
And
Thank you guys. It's a lot of fun for me. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Once you scale Carba and you guys are off and running, we're going to send you the list of the other 3 fake carbon removal companies that we came up with. And we're going to tell you to try to create the fart helmet for the cow and the AI driven submarines for seaweed sinking.
Let's do an April Fool's episode, here in April, where
you come on and say, I got my exit at Carba. Here's what's next.
Right. I love that idea. We'll try to get some merit in those. No, but I love this. This is fantastic. I love, trying to poke holes in ideas. And as a scientist, I'm a skeptic. I think there's a lot of like anti-science going on right now, and I think people don't realize, my goal is, in a lot of ways, is to prove people wrong. I want to find the truth. That's why I got into science. And so I'm always trying to poke holes in ideas, and I've been thinking about this stuff for 20 plus years, and I'm really excited about what we have here. And it's, both Paul and I see this as the best solution or use for biomass today. So yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, and would love to come back when you guys have more holes to poke in what we're doing.
We'll take you up on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and before we wrap up, Andrew, and tell our audience, is there any way to follow your journey, follow Carba on social media? Do you follow you? Like, what can you plug?
Yeah, I would definitely plug me on LinkedIn. Andrew James Jones, PhD, I think is my tag. It's pretty long. But then Carba, follow Carba. And we also have a newsletter. If you go onto our website, you can sign up for that.
Cool. And on the next newsletter, you'll make an announcement that you joined the world's most famous sustainability podcast, right?
Exactly right. I think Patricia's already getting a LinkedIn post ready. So
love it.
Awesome stuff. All right. Well, let's wrap it up on that. So thanks again, Andrew. Thank you, Owen. Thank you to our audience for joining. You can find Owen and I on LinkedIn, usually actively antagonizing the more complain, more sustainability, more complaining, more talk sustainability crowd. You can find this podcast and more great content at letstalkmoreaction.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to take action to make the world a better place?